Hi guys, we're going to take a slightly different format with this one. I brought a friend and partner, Usman, who is familiar with Reviv for at least 1 or 2 years now. And he's going to ask his questions about what Reviv is and I think he's a good example of someone who has a little bit of knowledge, but probably has a lot of questions. Welcome, Usman.
Hi, Ken. Excited to be doing this and talking about this because we've talked a lot about this. I remember you brought this up to me a while back because what was interesting was that you had gone through an episode with your health and had figured out a way how to get better. I first thought that it was just misattribution. Maybe something had happened because a lot of times something happens and then the biggest thing was this placebo versus something else, some other medication that you were taking? So the first question I want to ask is because what got me interested is that you did this yourself first. It wasn't something that you're claiming, which a lot of people claim, like, hey, I have this thing, it's going to help your health. So you helped yourself. So that gives it a lot of credibility at the start. But when you were in the midst of the health issue that you were going through, were there any other sort of like medications or things like that that you were on that you sort of like were doing also as regularly as the Reviv?
So one thing I think is important to point out is just how long this journey's been for me. And I'll explain what I mean. So in 2014, this all started when I was visiting a TMJ dentist, and he told me that he proposed to adjust my dental contacts, which I let him do because I was pretty ignorant at the time. And he drilled my back teeth and he flattened a lot of my cusps. And so within a couple months, I basically didn't function. I couldn't retain information. I felt like a hermit. I was having panic attacks. My whole neck and body changed. And so I was maintaining, I was always a healthy guy to that point. And I was maintaining more or less the same diet and exercise routine I had my entire adult life. I was 37 at the time. And yet I was just completely falling apart. So I knew hey, I've been a healthy guy for 20 years, more or less an adult for 20 years, doing the same stuff, going to the gym, running, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, not only is it not working, but I'm falling apart. So that was step one. And I was taking some stuff at the time, but then I started this director thing in late 14 and I started improving. But, I like to say I've collapsed my neck, my spine and my skull multiple times, probably at least 5-6 times in the last 10 years, and then had to refix it, with one of the biggest ones happening in 2020. And so I've been coming back since second half 21. Was I taking some other things during maybe during the early part, but for the last 4 or 5 years, I try to almost isolate everything out. I don't take any supplements. I don't do any exercise. I don't try to have any special diet, and function and things just continue to improve.
Which is the deal, right? All right, so let's sort of keep on drilling in onto the teeth aspect of this, because a lot of it stems from, in your theory, let's say older people eventually lose their teeth, they get dentures or things like that. Is it a natural progression that, over time, this sort of all right, maybe that's going a bit too advanced first. Maybe a better question is going to be starting with the teeth, or how this is. So do that, the dentist is something to your tooth, and based on that, a bunch of stuff started breaking down. So is the connection with the teeth or the nerve endings or something over there with the teeth? Or is it because the dentist did something to a tooth and then all of this started to happen? So are the teeth the core?
No, I like to call the teeth a complete sideshow, and I'll tell you why. So there is something that dentists call a curve of spee. So if you think about how your upper and lower teeth make contact, it's not a straight line. It actually curves back. So the line of occlusion between upper and lower teeth kind of curves up, and they call that a curve of spee. And so what I figured out as I was doing my experiments, because I used to have this splint that I would drill to represent the contacts. So I drill the contacts of the upper teeth. And I was doing various things, and I would see that as I improved, this curve would improve. And as I did things that were wrong, the curve would drop. And I would see this on this dental splint that I would adjust. And so what I basically figured out is that there's some biomechanics, or you can almost think about it as physics to how the body works, which are also representative of this curve. And so through trial and error, I was just basically figuring out that when I improve my body, and I might do yoga, this is back in 17, 16 when I was running all these experiments. I might do yoga, I might do mewing, but I'd see that as I adjusted the splint after I did it, the curve would improve. And whenever I left it off and I did nothing for a while, this curve would drop. Right. And the curve, you got to remember, like, the teeth don't change. Right. So when I talk about a curve, like there was an original curve, how my teeth came together. But when you improve, you actually pick the upper teeth kind of up off. And so there's a little bit of a gap, which dentists call a posterior open bite. So as you improve, you pick up the back. There's a little bit of posterior open bite. And if you sleep without a mouth guard, that'll close. And whatever you did regresses, which is why people that do yoga and mewing always have the same story, which is like they do it, and if they don't do anything for a couple of days, like they feel like they're back to square one, which is exactly what happens to their body. Why is it that the entire skull and spine are connected to this curve? That for me is a black box. And I openly say that. Like, all I know is that when this curve improves, your skull inflates, the cranial bones come back into alignment, the brain starts working a lot better, the spine starts to fix. And if this curve flattens, which is what happened to me in 14, and I know at least 5 or 6 other people to whom it happened, that your skull collapses, you start having cognitive and neurological issues, and your whole body like starts to collapse, and like you start having health issues. And orthodontics is one of the biggest drivers of this flattening, which is why all these kids that do braces and extractions and things end up having issues.
So before we get into orthodontics, let's sort of like keep on. So the curve of splee type of business seems to be the key for a lot of aspects over here. So you're talking about something moving up and then moving down. And I'm trying to figure out, like, is it a bone? Is it a muscle? Is it like, how does it move up and down? Because a bone shouldn't be moving as much unless the muscles around the bone are dropping it or something's happening over there.
So on this, it's really important in order to visualize this. And I used to play with this. I have this model skull, and I used to go to an osteopath and he used to play around with a skeleton that he had with a skull and like the jaw detached. And what you'll see is that a human jaw, like I had a jaw that was like connected by springs, is that there's different things that can affect how the teeth come together on a human being. It is you like the jaw is just connected by soft tissue, and the jaw can move like an airplane. Like it can move in 3 planes. So the jaw can move. The skull, because the arches change, right? And the skull can change positioning on the spine. Plus the spine can change. So any of those things change how your teeth come together. And this is what I was figuring out when I was doing these experiments. Like I'd do yoga and all of a sudden my teeth would like change how they came together, and I'd see it on this tracking splint with articulating paper. What is changing when your curve changes is any of those 3: your spine, your skull, or your jaw position.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. So that's changing, but coming back to this. So is this like the curve of splee? Is it a muscle? Is it a bone? Because I can feel a bone. There has to be some bone connecting the top of the, like your gums are there, which is connected to a bone.
This is your
like,
maxilla for the most
yeah,
part. And
yeah,
there's
yeah.
some
But
there's
your
some
but on a tooth, there's gum, and that gum has bone eventually at some point, right?
So one thing is too important to understand what the curve of spee is. Curve of spee is a dental term. I think they came up with it like in the late 1800s or so. And where your upper and lower teeth make contact, right? See where they make contact? Now, that curve where they make contact is your, and if you never did anything, like all your teeth make contact, all my teeth don't make contact in the back, for example. So where they make contact, that is your existing curve of spee. Eventually, as these things change, your upper teeth no longer make contact in the back, right? And so the difference, you can think of the top of your lower teeth as your original curve of spee because your teeth don't change. And the new curve of spee, as you're doing Reviv or whatever, is the line of your upper teeth. And so these two curves are like, the first curve is like this and the second curve is like this. The gap between those two curves is like what you've changed, represented by changes in the spine, skull, and jaw.
Right. And so for people who are listening, they probably know what a Reviv is. So eventually, both of us came to mouth guards differently, but my dentist recommended one for me, primarily because I was grinding my teeth, and he was like, "Hey, Usman, wear this," and you got to mouth guards differently as well. So now let's talk about this device. This device goes into your mouth, and then you wear it, and then yes, it does now create that artificial sort of like gap when you're wearing it, right? And so when you're wearing it, we're assuming now the splee is going to move upwards because there's some degree of pressure from the device which is moving it, like which is creating that space in the middle.
Yeah, the mechanic. So the way to think about it, this is why it's called Teeth a Sideshow. And that's why I say, like, anyone that focuses on teeth or focuses on bones are not going to figure this out, which is why chiropractors and osteopaths never achieve much in terms of like fixing your structure. And what it is actually doing is stretching the tissue of your jaw. So it's kind of like holding some space in your jaw, which forces all the soft tissue, which is fascia, skin, there's other things in there, right? You're forcing that to stretch because there's something constantly in there. And that, in my experience, that soft tissue is like it's connected to the soft tissue that covers your entire body, like a balloon. You can think of it like a full body wetsuit. And so by stretching here, you eventually end up stretching there, down there. And so like if you stretch here, it ends up making you more flexible. And if you stretch your body, it ends up putting some pressure on your skull. Like it works both ways. And so by basically stretching this, that is what ends up creating this curve of spee. It's because you're stretching the tissue and the skull inflates as if you're blowing air into a balloon, right? And which is why, like, if I were to compare the volume of my skull today compared to the late 2020, I probably have 20% more volume in my skull. And it's not just your skull, but it's like your whole body inflates, sort of.
Right. So when I put it on because he was like, "Hey, you'll sleep better, you will get less eye bags, and blah blah blah. Your teeth will be things." And then dentists have been recommending this for a bunch of things. Like his theory was because you will sleep better with this, and there will be less tension in your jaws when you're sleeping, because people who clench, like sleep apnea, well, not sleep apnea, but a lot of issues with sleep happen over there. So the attribution was over there. I didn't question it much. Dentist gave it. I was like, okay, makes sense that you put this rubber thing to stop your teeth from grinding against each other. And I started wearing it, and then soon became very used to it. When I didn't used to wear my guard at night, I couldn't sleep well. It psychologically had been like, I need to put this in to go to sleep. And I actually saw regression as well in my experience, because at one point I had lost my guard, and I was traveling for 2 months and stuff, and I didn't wear it. And I had like gum bleeding and a whole bunch of stuff because I would assume that stuff comes back. So one of the deals is, why is it so plasticky in the sense, like, it seems like it doesn't sit, like you can't fix it into shape, and you have to continually wear this, because then it makes me think, like, is this continuously moving then, this splee and your teeth and generally?
Yeah, let me break down. There's a few questions there. One is that if you had perfect development, you would look beautiful, like model level beautiful, right? and you would have wide dental arches. All your teeth would be straight. You'd have wisdom teeth in, right? And you would have a very healthy, nice curve of spee. And your teeth would be shaped that way. Like you'd have proper extrusion, proper expansion of the arches, but that didn't happen. And you can almost think of it like physics, right? Like what you're doing with this process with the Reviv is you're like taking, I love the visualization of a leaning tower of Pisa. You're taking the leaning tower of Pisa, you're stopping it from collapsing, and then you're starting to push it up a little bit, right? But that's like physics. You're putting force that way. But if you stop pushing, right, which means that like you stop wearing the guard, it comes down. And it actually comes down faster than, than you were putting it up. And therefore, like you're making up for the fact that your teeth did not extrude properly. And yes, like if you're happy with the structure you had before, then yeah, you can just say, all right, like, but I want to be on my natural teeth. But if you're not happy with that, you want to have better structure, then these physics dictate that you need to continue to wear the guard or, fill that gap somehow.
And so, all right. So two things over there. You said like if you were born with perfect bone structure and symmetrical sort of like things, and this is, I speak to doctors about this and things like that. Like that's you can't really control for it. It basically happens the way a baby is born and stuff like that, because these structures are set as soon as a baby is somewhat born and in their development, right? Like how the face comes out and things like that. We're saying like model-esque type people like a Giselle or someone like that is going to have like perfect curve of splee regardless of wearing mouth guard or not wearing mouth guard or things like that.
I would say no human is perfect
Okay.
because even someone really beautiful can probably further improve. But yes, if like a model would have very straight, good, very wide arches and a very good, healthy curve of spee. And the other thing that I want to say, which you said, is kids are born with this. So I put flat dental composite on my kid's teeth back in late 2021 as soon as I remembered how this works. And he's had, his skull has improved a lot. His spine has improved a lot. His teeth, like they were all stacked on each other, his baby teeth. And now they all got nice gaps. He'll never like, I would never put braces on him anyway, but like he'll never need them. Like everything's now growing correctly. So to say that like the kids are just born with it, like my theory, and I actually wrote an article on this, is that if you put flat cement on the last teeth and build up the height, the way the biomechanics work is such that I believe every single human child that you do this to, if you start at like 2 years old, will be model level beautiful. And there's actually a couple friends that recently gave birth and they're going to try this with their kids.
Right. I mean, now, like, this is the part that then people will start to turn their like BS radar on, right? So you're saying like, hey, guards are not new. Like guards have been around for a long time. People have been using guards for a while. Maybe people stop using guards or things like that. Like, do you think like people who use guards in the past also were experiencing some of these benefits that Revive? Because there are different types of guards. I know that Revive's new guards and stuff are like properly made, which are much better than generic guards. But if you look at guards, like, do they all do this?
Yeah, so there's two rules that I figured out through my experimentations, and remember, and this will kind of explain a number of things. One rule is you need to add vertical height, which means that you need to put separation between your teeth, right? But the other thing is that you cannot lock a jaw position, which like on natural teeth, the upper and lower teeth have cusps and they come together in a fixed position, right? And you want to make sure that they don't come together in a fixed position, or rather like it's almost like the bottom teeth, like you put something over it so it's a flat surface and they can just skate over each other. Lots of TMJ, like a very expensive TMJ dentist, because I'd been to a few back in 14 when I had the problem. they will lock a jaw position. So they'll create splints like forward positioning splints, and they'll lock a jaw in a certain, and that will actually collapse things. Like things will get worse. And I went through that. And it's because the jaw, and this is much more complex, but the jaw doesn't have a single position that you can just lock it into. There's actually like different positions, like retrusion and protrusion, that the jaw needs support for from the cusps of the teeth. And this is something my friend found out back in 2017, 18. He was a genius. And that's like, I was trying to figure out like why, no matter where I fix my jaw, I'm getting worse. And it's because you cannot fix your jaw in a single position. For that reason, if you have some kind of dental splint or mouth guard, like a boil and bite, that is bad. Because it's like fixing a single position of the teeth because you took an imprint of the teeth and you're locking things there. Like you're locking the jaw there. And a lot of other mouth guards that people use for sleep apnea, they're like, they take a fix, they lock your jaw into a fixed position because they like fit around the teeth. Right. So the key thing about a good mouth guard like Reviv is that both upper and lower teeth don't fit into anything. And so that, because that, and you'll see as the process, and like I'm watching as hundreds of people go through this process, the upper and the lower teeth are constantly changing almost daily. The arches are expanding, teeth are uprighting, teeth are moving, and you need to allow that, to allow this kind of inflating the skull to happen. And so some people, like so that's the ideal, is when nothing upper and lower teeth, completely free. Second one is when you wear what's called a flat plane splint, which is like something, I think you might have that. Like it goes on the upper or the lower arch, fits on the teeth, but is flat in terms of how it contacts the other arch. That will still improve you, in my finding, right? And there was a very famous dentist called Dr. Brendan Stack who was fixing people with Parkinson's and stuff with a flat plane splint. But it is far better and faster when you don't have something that fits over the teeth, because then if you wear it on your upper arch, it prevents the upper teeth from moving because it's locked into the splint.
Right. Okay. All right. That explains, because essentially I didn't know about this and I was wearing it, and I sort of like moved on. But the whole idea is like most people will hear this, because the other part is braces, right? So a lot of people, when you said you're get at like crowding, like braces is default, Invisalign, like whatever people have. I know you've written about this very briefly. Like, aren't braces sort of like helping to move the teeth back and put them into their supposed normal positions and things like that? How come they have such a negative impact on like the collapsing aspect?
So one thing you'll notice when you do Reviv and things are expanding is that it is impossible to predict how the teeth are going to move. Like you would never find a computer that are going to be able to model this, right? Like if I look at like the change of a person, they start wearing Reviv for a year and you try to model out how the teeth move, because you have the arches expanding, you have the curve of spee improving, you have the skull, you have the jaw changing position. All these things are changing, right? So braces have a different philosophy. They say, okay, I'm going to latch onto these teeth and I'm going to tell them exactly where to go, right? Which ends up being out of, like, you can think of it as like structural supports. And you kind of like arbitrarily decided, okay, I'm going to move this one here and here and here, and I'm going to make them all look pretty. But that's not what the building needs. And so as soon as, and a lot of times, like when you're wearing the braces, you may not have major problems. The problems with braces typically come when you take them off, and even when you take off the retainers, when you have the biggest problems. Because once you take off the retainers, what happens? And this is the same for Invisalign. Everything starts moving. And what you'll find is like they were held at a place because they weren't in the right place for the structure. And the way they move is that like they'll move to better position and this curve will flatten. Right. And I have a time lapse video of that exact thing happening when someone,
Yeah.
took off their aligners.
All right. So where I'm all with you for fixing structure, letting the teeth sort of like move around, building that thing helps generally with a lot of things. personally experienced it as well. So I can't say to anyone who says like this doesn't work. I can tell them like, hey, it does work. But then your theory goes a bit sort of like much further out, right? So you have the article about Bruce Willis and you can like link it and things like that. People who have stuff done, but ultimately develop disease, right? Like disease in some sort of way, psychological, neurological, heart, and all of these other things. I wonder, like, why you went as far as like saying like this is also correlated or has the ability to stop some of that other stuff, because up to the point of putting a device in, we made a strong case why the teeth move the way it moves, the jaw that moves, the impact it has generally with your structure. I think like if you stop there, then don't you think like it would be like people would be like, all right, cool, you contain it over here, but then you like knock-on effects are knock-on effects. Like, like that's like attributing cigarettes to cancer. Like people argue one way or the other, like, it does, it doesn't. Now pretty much there's stuff on all packets which says cigarettes causes cancer and all of this other stuff, so don't smoke them. So what pushed you to go further? Like, why not just stop here inside a domain which is relatively defendable, attacks from around it? Because, yeah. Any
Yeah.
thoughts?
Well, I would say, for the people first starting Revive, I'm not trying to convince them of how far this goes, but a lot of people that start Revive start because they've done orthodontics and they're having, I spoke with a girl this morning for 40 minutes and she had had extractions and orthodontics when she was 15 years old. And so she ended up, she couldn't concentrate. She got ADHD and OCD, failed out of college. Her mother and she herself thought they were lazy, anxiety attacks on a daily basis, some of them suicidal, like she has suicidal thoughts. And she's got all these health issues at 26 years old, right? And basically like has to work from her bed because she like her posture's ruined. And it kind of is afraid to go out because of all these anxiety attacks. And she's this gentle, nice girl. And all of this, in my view, was the extractions and orthodontics that she did when she was younger. And so I partly go as far as I do so that these people, whose lives are kind of in tatters, start to put together the dots of how this works, right? So why do I do it? And why do I put those stories out? So that people with dementia so that they're willing to try it. And like, I selfishly want data points. Like if I can solve those things with those people, with a simple mouth guard, like, we'll have data. It'll get more and more over time. But in terms of how I made that conclusion myself, that's a different logic. And that logic is like, you got to remember, I did this 10 years. I collapsed and fixed myself 5 times. And I saw everything that changed during that process. And so if I'd only done this once, I probably wouldn't have concluded most of that stuff. But like when you see that, okay, every time I get worse, my neurology gets worse. Like I started feeling more like a hermit and I couldn't read people. My cognitive function got worse. Like I wouldn't be able to focus. Like it'd take me a long time to like think through a, relatively simple problem. Right. And then every time I got better, cognitive, neurological, like health, like I'm 47, I don't do exercise, I eat whatever I want. And like, I just feel like a machine every day for 2 years. I don't burn out. Like it's impossible. And I've felt bits of that before when I was improving, like when I was picking myself up. So when you see the same pattern and you repeat this pattern 5 times in 10 years, you're like, wow, like this, does this work on everybody the same way? Like, if so, like, this is crazy. So that's kind of how I did that.
So going back to the 26-year-old example, right? Like if someone would have heard that story, like, first of all, orthodontics and extraction wouldn't have come up. The story would have gone like, there's a girl, she started to have trouble in school, anxiety, social pressure, whatever. For a lot of people, it's addictions and things like that. It sort of like snowballed into much further depression, because the whole deal is there's far more awareness about neurological sort of like stuff. Like I still think like certain people have like an incident, whether blood clot or something like that, that happens in their body, and there's a knock-on effect on some health part. And and then for a lot of people, this mental illness is self-inflicted as well, whereby they get into a depressive state, and then there are all of these chemicals and stuff like that. So when someone would talk around that, the conclusion would be like that imbalance basically happens. And as a result of that, she is where she is right now. Is the attribution towards the teeth thing just sort of like forcefully attributing to that part? Because there must have been a lot of things that happened between 15 and 26, right? 11 years between that. But do you think like that's one of the reasons or like primary reason? Because lots of people with braces that I know are much older now and they're also fine. So it works both ways then, no?
Yeah. So first of all, like I've seen this connection between, yeah, and I think it's a combination of extractions and braces that are the most deadly. I've seen people, like Cristiano Ronaldo is a perfect example. When you do braces and you only move the front teeth, like the front teeth don't have cusps, right? They like the front teeth kind of just go over the bottom teeth. So if you move them, you're not really changing this curve of speed. So like people like Cristiano Ronaldo, they did braces, they're fine. Other people did braces, they moved their back teeth a little bit, and then they took off their retainer, and like things shifted. They're kind of like their structure dropped a bit, but like they function, and they'll probably just age a little bit faster than they would have, right? But like people like this girl, like you gotta remember, I have met in Revive doing right now probably not less than about 20 ADHD cases that they themselves more or less attributed to the braces. Like I'm not like putting this puzzle together for these girls. Like she knows, like she thinks like everything. It was after the braces that everything and these extractions. But I've seen this pattern so many times, and like I do not remember the last. I meet a lot of ADHD people in Revive. Like I don't remember the last time I met an ADHD person that I don't think did orthodontics or had some kind of major dental treatment. Like I just don't
Yeah.
meet them, and I meet a lot of ADHD people.
Yeah.
So when you see this pattern, it just recurs all the time. You start to put together the dots.
Yeah. So yeah. And so for sure, I think orthodontics, again, orthodontics, because of what it is, it's like moving these teeth, forcing functions, you know, putting the retainer, removing the retainer, not creating the connection that, the structure has to stay the way it has to stay. That I completely understand. And then the collapsing of the splee based on your theory then has a lot of like knock-on effects within your body structure as it begins to move. And I think like perhaps just my 2 cents would be like the knock-on effects until there's probably more studies will make that better, because ultimately right now I know hundreds of people are going through Revive right now and getting results and things like that. And soon there will be thousands of people. Eventually there will have to be a study of the knock-on effects of splee, collapsing of all of the stuff that you're talking about, right? Like someone's going to have to say like these 1,000 people wear this type of mouth guard. These 1,000 people do not wear this type of mouth guard. Extrapolate over a 3-year sort of like period, see what happens. And a controlled study like that will then probably be needed to
Well, I think
create.
it depends. People ask me this, and I always
Yeah.
answer the same way: is that I will never encourage or even like try to help such a study from happening. And the answer to that is very simple. It's like I want to get ahead of this and create a moat, right? Like the last thing I want to do is create some study where the dentists are all allowed to follow me. Like I'd rather like people think this, but the thing is, like I see that people are people are like coming in droves now. So the people are not waiting for a study like most people, at least the ones that are coming to Revive. There are so many people impacted by this stuff. Like I'm gonna have a huge market without any study, and people just hearing that their friends or people they know, whatever, and they come to Revive and they start doing it. Like and within week one, the lights come on. They're like, wow, this shit's working, right? And I know that Reviv is going to have an amazing market potential just with that. And so I want the dentist to shit on this for as long as possible, because that is like, I'm just going to like, by the time they finally get this approved, I'm going to have buried them.
Right. No, I'm all for, as a capitalist, I'm all for building moats and stuff like that. I think the argument which will be raised will be for the business itself as well, right? Like the deal is like, this happens, these things move. It has been shown to have these positive effects. Your results may vary because everyone is different, but most likely here are hundreds of people who've done this, similar situations, this happens. I think like as long as the claims are on that thing, then you remain fine. I think like when someone comes in with a very serious disease or onset of Alzheimer's, dementia, cardiac, or whatever they may be suffering, or even advanced stage mental illness, I think like those are the parts to be careful about, because there are lots of then legal implications for the business that fall into the thing. And I think like as long as it's there, that's why I think like this, as long as we stay within the structure and say like, listen, you want to do this because it has potential knock-on effects, I think it's great. Like people figure out whether it works for them, doesn't work for them, because a lot of people will not stick with it as well, right?
I think you'd be surprised. I think like people that do it for at least they make it for a few weeks. I'm seeing that most of them stick with it just because like you feel it working pretty much on day one, right? Like the amount of posts that we get in our community, like, oh my God, like it's been 2 days and it's crazy what this is doing, is like the common experience, right? It's only the people that have very good structure that don't feel as much. And the other thing, yeah, like with the claims, so I like that we're small and we're gonna be able to get away with some things early on that we're not gonna be able to get away with later on. And so like we can be a little bit more flexible with what we say early on. But like my plan is later on when people are actually paying attention to us, yeah, we curb everything back, we stick to legal limits. But at that point, there are so many stories out there. And I've learned so much about these kind of like viral guerrilla marketing of mewing and thumb pulling. Mewing and thumb pulling are like you talk to a Gen Z person, you ask them mewing and thumb pulling, like every Gen Z person knows what that is and has probably tried it, right? And there's not a single paid ad for that stuff anywhere, right? But like these kids just put out content about it, they create communities. We have a whole bunch that are in Revive now, and it's crazy how passionate they are about this, and they know like all the gurus, and so we just need to get the ball rolling, enough stories, and then for those more like knock-on effects that we can't talk about directly, like I have a feeling it'll happen anyway. Like because people that have dementia know, oh wow, like all these people, I heard all these people were like getting help by Revive. So
Yeah.
that's at least kind of the rough plan.
Cool, man. Exciting stuff. I'm excited to be part of the ride as well. So yeah, this is fun. I think like hopefully we talked about it in greater detail, because I think people poke holes where it can't be done with just a mouth guard. Understanding some of the structure, which is why I focus purely on just the mouth and just the structure to get people like what this does. And then and then yeah, then everyone's benefits depends on, like Ken said, how long you wear it for, how religiously you sort of like put it on and stuff like that. Because like you said, it collapses back. I've seen it collapse for myself as well when you stop wearing this for a while. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there's two last things I like to leave with. One is like, so how do you accelerate the process? So what you learn and what I learned is that these mechanics are directly related to flexibility in the body, right? So basically anything that is inflexible in the body can be stretched with the jaw at the same time. So you put that in a stretch, you stretch the jaw, and then all of a sudden this becomes more and more flexible. And so my theory and what I'm pretty sure is going to end up being true is that the most symmetrical and best profile you can have is when you are fully flexible, right? Because they're two sides of the same coin. And so like it's not just a function of how much you wear the thing, because you'll plateau. It's a function of, okay, like do you wear it and then you're stretching the body out, right? And that's kind of what I do to accelerate. the second last thing I'd like to say is that people say, "Oh, like, Ken, you're not even a dentist. Like, why'd you get into this dental stuff?" And like, I consider this problem like 1% dental, right? Like, you could remove the teeth, and I could do everything about Revive. Like, you just put a mouth guard in your mouth, it still works. You don't need the teeth. So I call this a logical problem where you need to solve it with logic. When you think about any health issue, there's 3 angles that, in my view, you can logically think about it from. It's either genetic, it's lifestyle, or it's structural collapse, right? Like, the only other thing is like shit, like pure chance, which I don't think really exists, right? So you think about genetic, like people need to. I studied evolution in college, and I studied or read a lot of books on it. Like anything, genetics, genetic. You can think of evolution equals natural selection and mutation, right? And so any mutation that is bad for you, natural selection would kill off. So anything that's bad for you, like obesity or neurological disease, if it spikes up, it by definition cannot be genetic, because there's no way, like, it breaks the theory of evolution, right? And then so there's all this stuff like that cannot be genetic. And then there's lifestyle. And for me, lifestyle is like, okay, like you want to say that it's diet and exercise. I'm like, okay, like, well, if you can take population A that doesn't do any of that, and they're even more healthy than population B who does all of it, then like there's too many exceptions for lifestyle to explain it. And so therefore, I think what they're going to find is that literally like 2% of all health and medical issues are in those first 2 buckets. And 98% are going to be in this other structure bucket. It's literally going to be the root cause of everything. Just because like it logically doesn't make sense to put it in those. And that's where I think this, like you really need to like sit there and think about what I'm saying to kind of get it. But that is what I'm so excited for these next, 10, 20 years.
Yeah, for sure. I wouldn't necessarily agree with the 98% on the structure side, because I mean, come on, like some people are born with genetic mutations or like some gene is missing in them. Like the whole deal is like if you have one of these genes missing, the probability of you getting breast cancer is like 65% or more. So I feel like, if you have 2 copies of a certain gene, the probability of you getting Alzheimer's is also a lot more. No one says 100%, right? There's always the deal. I mean, lifestyle is fine. Like the whole deal is like you could drink yourself silly every single day and destroy your liver and it won't function anymore, which a lot of people do. You could go on OxyContin and basically kill yourself with opioids. You would forcibly sort of like destroy your body, right?
Well, I wrote an article a couple weeks back about the main lead, I think the lead guitarist of Motley Crue, Tommy. What's his name? Tom. But he was a class example because I someone sent me this TikTok video of him and he was being interviewed like a year ago, and he was like, yeah, like even a little while ago, I was drinking 8 bottles of alcohol a day, like every day for years. And he's like, I can't even believe I'm sitting here. And meanwhile, you're looking at him, he's 62 years old. The guy looks great. Like, nice profile, like looks healthy, young, probably looks better than Tom Cruise, who's the same age but did braces and is a health nut. So I think when you go out there, like even the guy that did like all these alcohol and drugs, you'll find the guys that did all that shit and they're 65 and they're great.
Yeah. I don't doubt it, because the same thing will happen on the other side. There's certain people's either structure, genetics, something like that, which will make them more immune. But I feel like there have been enough long-term studies, like if you give people this sort of stuff, like your liver just can't function. There's certain body functions that just can't do it. Like if your arteries get stuffed with calcium and blood can't flow through them anymore, which could be a function of collapse as well, but that calcium comes in from somewhere, right? Like ultimately, like, but I do agree, like ultimately what you're trying to say, like keeping yourself healthy in the way that if your structure is there, like certain people, like I know in Pakistan, like if you go up north and all of these places where none of this stuff has come, But again, they don't have all of the super processed food. They sort of like have a more active diet, and maybe they also have better structure as just people. They just live longer over there, and you just see it across the board. So, but I don't think many people even associate structure. So even if you can actually bring the structure collapse thing to 10, 20% in people's heads, I still think that's a huge sort of like win, because who says today that I'm doing this to improve my structure or stuff like that? Like, what do you even do when you want to do that?
Not many,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But you just wear a rubber mouth guard, to be honest, at least to
Yeah.
start. But like, I have a feeling that the trajectory of this is going to shock everyone. Like, what I'm seeing already, when people become the converted, they start telling a lot of people. And, I've been feeling at some point there's going to be a critical mass and it's going to rock it. That's what I guess. And one story I want to give is this guy from London, and he's about to finish he's a med student. So he's about to graduate medical school, and he's been trained how to be a doctor. And he found me in my blog, and he starts writing me. He sends me all these voice notes every day. Basically, like he had a lot of the same theories. He's been wearing a mouth guard for a year and a half, and he's second guessing his entire medical education. He's been trained as a doctor in the UK, and he's saying like, wow, like the human being in its essence is everyone is beautiful. Everyone has perfect proportions, and there's nothing genetic about that. Like we all have that in our DNA, and we were all built to be that. And so as long as you start working and making your way back to that structure, everything works beautifully and you don't get all these diseases. Right. And he's like spouting back to me all my theories that I've been writing about. And he's saying he had a lot of the same theories. And the guy's like studying how the body works to be a doctor. And he's like, yeah, like I don't, I'm going to try to take this to replace what I'm learning because I think it's all bullshit. So anyway, I think it's gonna be an exciting 20 years in this space.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this was fun. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
And yes, speak soon.